Welcome to Fortune Forecast. I am Daisy, your hostess, and you are in my book playlist. If you're new to my channel, welcome, and to our Fortune community, welcome back. We are now in part 3 of Upton Sinclair's book titled The Book of Life. It was published in 1921 by the Payne Book Company out of Chicago, and it is in the public domain. Part 3 is The Book of Love. If anything, it has offered us an opportunity to get a flare of what it was in America in the early 1900s through the eyes of this author. And I have to say, while the women's movement has done a lot of great things, I'm not sure if a lot has changed when it comes to sex. If you are eager to get started on the chapter, please go to the description and click on the timestamp. Otherwise, I invite you to stay here with me for my narrator's comments.
I am a first-generation American. My parents are of the Caribbean island, the Dominican Republic. During their time and the growth and culture of the island was very conservative about sex and preserving the virginity of the daughter, while the virginity of the son was not important. What was important that, just as the author mentioned, that it was not spoken about, that it was an unspoken rule that young men were to sow their wild oats. And from what I can remember being a little girl, because I had mentioned in previous videos, when my parents came to America, my mom was literally bursting with me inside of her, and within weeks I was born here in the United States. There was a lot of hard times for them, and I was sent back to the island and was raised pretty much with both sets of grandparents for 5 years. And from what I can remember, back then, there was a very distinguished social class. It was the rich and the poor. From what I could tell, our families were not poor. Both my grandparents were both landowners. One was a farmer and the other was a cattle rancher. I could tell you that one of my grandfathers was a notorious womanizer. And it was okay, apparently. He had several mistresses. For each of his mistresses, he built homes. I actually have uncles that are 30 years younger than I am. Unfortunately, they've long passed away, and I cannot sit down and talk with my grandparents about their personal loves and their life. But I could tell you that perhaps I would have had a different life if some of that wealth would have been passed down to the grandchildren's. But that wasn't our fate. My father was to make it on his own and be a man on his own. And so, therefore, I must also be a woman on my own. But here I digress. Let's go back to the sex and the hypocrisy of a double standard, which may or may not exist still today. I can also tell you that influence about parenting and their conversations about sex, because when I was a young teenager, because of my parents' upbringing and that no one talked about sex, I guess what they saw, out there in nature, they knew that eventually it was going to happen, but it's not something that parents would sit down and talk with their kids about. Well, my parents were all about protecting what was between my legs. And we were going to Archbishop Curley High School, and I saw how my parents were struggling to pay the tuition for the Catholic school, Archbishop Curley High School, for both my brother and I. And then one day, I don't know what overcame me. I saw my parents talking about bills, and I saw their struggle. And I just told my parents about an incident of a young girl in a private school who got pregnant. And I just kind of told my parents, I said, I hope you guys are not sending me to private school because you're protecting my virginity. I understand the values and the morals that I am being raised with, and I will honor my parents. Put it this way, my parents kept hammering the fact that my father fell in love with my mother in 1 week and they were married. And that's what they were expecting, that I would find someone and in 1 week I was going to get married. And I already knew, I had this gut feeling that it was going to be a tough road with me and my parents. I really wanted any way out. And I even enlisted in the Air Force. Wow, I was not 18, so they didn't take me. My parents freaked out when the military came in trying to get a signature from an adult. And months later, I had just turned 18, and coincidentally, I was working at Burger King, and the manager, who was 10 years older than I, asked me out for a lunch. I told him that, I had to ask my parents. I did, and my father blew his top, and it's like, well, the only way you're leaving this house is if you're married. I was so naive. I actually told that to this person, and he said, well, would you like to get married? And literally, we got married within, 2 weeks. And there you have a personal story, maybe too much information, but here is what happens when parents either impose their prudish upbringing and ignorance about sex or fail to explore and speak about this topic with their children, which may avoid promiscuity or impact someone's decision that will change their whole life. Best thing that happened to me in that relationship, which lasted 10 years, was that this person was kind, had a healthy outlook about sex, which was very comforting for someone that had never seen a male part before. So I could just say that thank you to my ex-husband, that I have a whole different outlook about sex, about talking about sex, about my body, and about what other people are doing behind closed doors. That's their business. But that segues into the next part. What about monogamous sex? Are humans designed for monogamous sex? I went to this website, crosstalk.cell.com, and they had an article titled 10 Examples of Monogamy in the Animal Kingdom. My search was for sexual monogamy in mammals, thinking that, well, humans are mammals, right? Well, we didn't make that list. And for entertainment, I will share with you the animals that are monogamous, not just mammals, exclusive to that. Turtle doves and swans, snowy owls, male dik-diks, which are some type of deers, male prairie voles, black vultures, shingleback skinks, California mice, owl monkeys, bald eagles, albatrosses, and my favorite, because they come visiting my backyard almost once a week, the sandhill crane. So no, we did not make it. Then on further research, I said, okay, well then let me narrow down my search. And I put in my query, are humans meant to be monogamous? And according to scientificamerican.com, they state, for humans, monogamy is not biologically ordained. According to evolutionary psychologist Devi M. Buss of University of Texas at Austin, humans are in general innately inclined toward non-monogamy. There you have it. I could have told you that. And then that's where we segue into what? The next question. And like I said, I read these things and I end up with more questions than I do answers. And the question is, where does morality fit in all of this? Do we need new standards as the human race seems to be evolving or de-evolving? Is morality something that pulls us all together as a collective group, consciously looking to better each other, looking to believe in ourselves, looking to raise our standards and our virtues? What purpose? To create a better race? I don't know. Again, I have more questions than I do answers because I can only speak for myself. And I could tell you that virtue is something that one needs to work on, and we are given free will to choose that route. Personally, I am not the virtuous, but definitely would love to put myself on a track to polish myself up. Sure, when I look in the rearview mirror, I've had so many challenges and so many things that I've had to rewrite the script on so that I can transcend certain ways of thinking to become a better person. And I'm definitely not the person that I was many, many years ago, and definitely have no idea if I will be given the opportunity to continue growing any further. But as of this moment right now, I could tell you that I would choose a path where I can love myself more, be better, and shine brighter than yesterday. Well, again, I think I've gone a little bit overboard, but still, one person's thought can influence another person's thought, and we can begin a conversation. And hopefully, maybe this author might have some answers as we go into the next chapter. I would love to hear your feedback on this, and let's start our own conversation. Going now to chapter 31, Sex and the Smart Set. Portrays the moral customs of those who set the fashion in our present day world. We have discussed what is happening to our young people. Let us next consider what our mature people are doing. Having mentioned conditions in England, I will give a glimpse of London high life 2 years before the war. As a visiting writer, I was invited to luncheon at the home of a woman novelist, whose books at the time were widely read both in her country and here. Present at the luncheon was a prominent publisher, who I afterwards learned was the lady's lover. Also the lady's grown and married son. The publisher looked like a buxom hunting squire, but the lady told me that he was very unhappy because his wife would not divorce him. The lady had just come from a weekend party at the home of an earl, who at this moment occupies one of the highest posts in the gift of the British Empire. Things had gone comically wrong at this country house party, she said, because the hostess had failed to remember that Lord So-and-so was at present living with Lady Somebody else. One of the duties of hostesses at house parties, it appears, is to know who is living with whom in order that they may be put in connecting rooms. In this case, his lordship had been grouchy and everybody's pleasure had been spoiled. This produced a discussion of the subject of marriage, and the son remarked that marriage was like an old slipper. You wore it because you had got used to it, but you did not talk about it because it was unimportant and stupid. I went away and happened to mention these matters to a friend who had met this woman novelist in Nice. The novelist had there, in a group of people, been introduced to a young girl who was suffering from neurasthenia. My dear, said the novelist affectionately, what you need is to have an illegitimate baby. This, you would say, is the old world, and you always knew that it was corrupt. If so, let me tell you a few things that I have seen among the upper circles of our own great and virtuous democracy. My first acquaintance with New York society came after the publication of The Jungle. As the author of that book, I was a sensation, almost as much as so as if I had won the heavyweight championship of the world. Out of curiosity, I accepted an invitation for a weekend amid what is called the hunting set of Long Island. Here was a gorgeous palace with many tapestries and soft-footed servants and decanters and cocktails at every stage of one's journey about the place, like coaling stations on the trade routes of the British Empire. One of the first sights that caught my young eye was a large and stately lady in semi-undress, smoking a big black cigar. If I were to mention her name, every newspaper reader in America would know her. And before I had been introduced to her, I heard two young men in evening dress make an obscene remark about her and what she was waiting for that evening. I discovered quickly that, while there was a great deal of sex among these people, there was very little love. There was principally a wish to score cleverly and subtly at the expense of another person's feelings. It is called a smart set, you understand, and I will give you an idea of how smart it is. I was walking down a passage with a lady, and on a couch sat another lady, side by side with a certain very famous lawyer, whose golden eloquence you have probably listened to from platforms, and whom, for the purpose of this anecdote, I will name Jones. Mr. Jones and the lady on the sofa were sitting very closely together, and my companion, with a bright smile over her shoulder, called out, "Be careful, Mary. You'll be scattering a lot of little Jones around here if you don't watch out." Quite continental, you perceive, and a long way from the Puritanism of our ancestors. From there I went to the billiard room and observed a young man of fashion trying to play billiards when he was half drunk. It was a funny spectacle, and they took away his cigarette by force for fear he would drop it on the cloth of the billiard table. Pretty soon he was telling about a racing meet and an orgy with Negro women in a stable. Therefore I returned to where the ladies were gathered, and one middle-aged matron, who had read widely, including some of my books, engaged me in serious conversation. I came later on to know her rather well, and she told me her views of love. The source of all the sex troubles of humanity was that they took the relationship seriously. Modern discoveries made it unnecessary to attach importance to it. She herself, acting upon this theory, probably had had relations with my friends. Reading the proofs of this book, begged me to omit the number of men because you would not believe me. You may argue that this is not typical, save that I fell into the clutches of some particular group of degenerates. All I can tell you is that these people are as socially prominent as any in New York City. I will say furthermore that I have sat in the home of the best known corporation lawyer in America, who was paid $1 million to organize the Steel Trust, the late James B. Dill, at the time a member of the Court of Appeals of New Jersey, and have heard him muckrake his business friends by the hour with stories of that sort. I have heard him tell of the Steel crowd hiring a trolley car and a load of prostitutes and champagne, and taking an all-night trip from one city to another, smashing up both the car and the prostitutes. I have heard him tell of sitting on the deck of a Sound steamer and overhearing two of his Wall Street associates and their wives arranging to trade partners for the night. I have mentioned a lady who had a great many lovers. Once, in the dining room of a club on Fifth Avenue, commonly known as the Millionaires, a companion pointed out various people, many of whom I had read about in the newspapers, and told me funny stories about them. "See that old boy with a notebook," said my host. "That is Jacob so-and-so, and he is entering up the cost of his lunch. He keeps accounts of everything, even of his women. He told me he had over 1,000, and they had cost him over 1,000,000. It is possible to say what is the most terrible thing in capitalist society, but among the most terrible are assuredly the old men. The richest and the most powerful banker in America was, in his sex habits, the merry jest of New York society. He took toward women the same attitude as King Edward VII. If he wanted one, he went up and asked for her, and it made no difference who she was or where she was. This man's personal living expenses were $5,000 a day, and all women understood that they might have anything within reason. When I was a boy living in New York, there was a certain aged moneylender about whom one read something in the newspapers almost every day. He was a prominent figure because he was worth 80 millions, yet wore an old rusty black suit and saved every penny. Every now and then you would read in the paper how some woman had been arrested for attempting to blackmail him in his office. It seemed puzzling, because you wouldn't think of him as a likely subject for blackmail. Some years later, I met Dorothy Richardson, author of The Long Day, a very fine book which has been undeservedly forgotten. Miss Richardson had been a reporter for the New York Herald and had been sent to interview this old moneylender. She was ushered into his private office, and as soon as the attendant had gone out and closed the door, the old man came up and without a word of preliminaries grabbed her in his arm like a gorilla. She fought and scratched and got out and was wise enough to say nothing about it. Therefore, there was nothing published about another attempt to blackmail the aged moneylender. What this means is that men of unlimited means live lives of unbridled lust. And then in their old age, they are helpless victims of their own impulses. There was a certain enormously wealthy United States senator from West Virginia who came very near being vice president of the United States. This doddering old man would go about the streets of Washington with a couple of very decorous and carefully trained attendants. And whenever an attractive young woman would pass on the street, or when one would approach the senator, these two attendants would quietly slip their arms into his and hold him fast. They would do this so that the ordinary person would not suspect what was going on, but would think the old man was being supported. You do not have to take these things on my word. The newspapers are full of them all the time, and they are proven in court. Just now, as I write, the president of the most powerful bank in America is claiming in court that his children are not his own, but that their father is an Indian guide. His wife, on the other hand, is accusing the banker of having played the role of husband to several other women. He would take these women traveling on his yacht, which, quaintly enough, was termed the Modesty. All the papers have been full of the Hammond case. Here is a wealthy man, Republican National Committee man from Oklahoma, who is about to go to Washington to advise our new president whom to appoint to office from that state. Before he goes, he casts off his mistress and she shoots him. She was his secretary, it appears, and helped him to make his fortune. She has made many friends, and $1 million is spent to save her life. The prosecuting attorney calls her a painted snake and accuses her of having sat week after week displaying to the jury 24 inches of silk stocking shin bone. The jury, apparently unable to withstand his allurement, acquits the woman, and she announces that she intends to bring suit under the man's will to get his money. Also, she is going into the movies and tells us that it is to be for educational purposes. Everything in our capitalist society must be educational. You understand? It was P.T. Barnum who discovered that the American people would flock to look at a five-legged calf if it was presented as educational. The moving pictures and the theaters are the honeypots which gather the feminine beauty and youthful charm of our country for the convenience of rich man's lust. These girls swarm in the theatrical agencies and in the artist studios. They starve for a while and finally they yield. In every great city, there are thousands of men of wealth whose only occupation is to prey upon such girls. I know a certain theatrical manager, the most famous in the United States, a sensual, stout little Jew. He is a man of culture and subtle insight, and in the course of his conversation he described to me, quite casually and as a matter of course, the charm of deflowering a virgin. Nothing could equal that sensation. The first time was the last. Many years ago, there was a horrible scandal in New York. The most famous architect in America was murdered, and the newspapers probed into his life, and it was revealed to us that many of the most famous artists and men about town in New York maintained elaborate studios, equipped with every luxury, all the paraphernalia of all the vices of the ages. And through these places there flowed an endless stream of beautiful young girls. In every large city in America, you will find an athletic club. And if you go there and listen to the gossip, You discover that there are scores of idle rich men with automobiles and private apartments, and a staff of procurers used in preying not merely upon young girls, but also upon young boys. And these are not merely the children of the poor, they are the children of all but the rich and powerful. In the movies, you see pictures of girls lured into automobiles and carried out into the country or seduced by means of knockout drops, and you think this is just melodrama. But it is happening all the time. In every big city of our country, the police know that hundreds of young girls disappear every year. At a recent convention of police chiefs in Washington, it was stated from police records that 60,000 girls disappear every year in the United States, leaving no trace. Unless the parents happen to be in position to make a fuss, not even the names of the girls are published in the newspapers. I do not ask you to believe such things on my word. Believe District Attorney Sims of Chicago, who made the most thorough study of this subject ever made in America and wrote, quote, "When a white slave is sold and landed in a house or dive, she becomes a prisoner. In each of these places is a room having but one door, to which the keeper holds the key. Here are locked all the street clothes, shoes, and ordinary apparel. The finery provided the girls is of nature to make their appearance on the street impossible. Then, in addition to this handicap, the girl is placed at once in debt to the keeper for a wardrobe. She cannot escape while she is in debt, and she can never get out of debt. Not many of the women in this class expect to live more than 10 years. Perhaps the average is less. Many die painful deaths by disease, many by consumption. But it is hardly beyond the truth to say that suicide is their general expectation." End of chapter 31. As we move on to the next chapter, could you be kind enough and hit that like button to activate the YouTube algorithm and keep me floating around the web? Feel free to share this video with your friends or even the channel. And go ahead and subscribe. Let's meet at the next video for chapter 32.